very excited. Just across the pond, I'm from New Zealand, they're from Australia, but now living in Virginia, just from Singapore before that. It is Margie Warrell, PhD. Very impressed by that. Maggie is a LinkedIn top voice, best-selling author and keynote speaker, founder of Global Courage Leadership, and advisory board of the Forbes School Business and Technology. Very impressive kickoff to start with. No pressure, ladies and gentlemen. Maggie Warrell, how are you?
Now I've got to live up to expectation.
Oh, geez, I know the feeling. I'm like, sorry, I hope I'm not shit. I guess I'll start here. You've started in Australia. Mm-hmm. 7 sisters and brothers?
Yeah, three brothers and 3 sisters. Yeah.
And were you the youngest?
No, I'm the big sister.
Ah, that's even. I don't know if that's even tougher, because then you're right across all of it. If you think about the progression of coming from Australia to where you are now, and you think about the journey that you've had as a young buck into a grown weapon that's clearly gone global, what was it in your headspace that enabled you to successfully transition from local thinking to global execution? Because I think at a start, when you look at the resume of what you've done and how you've done it, it's extremely impressive. But clearly something in your headspace has kind of enabled that to drive and go. And a lot of people that live in smaller countries don't have that same either vision to think big enough or go big enough. So I'm just intrigued right at the core of it for the first question. What's in your head that's helped you go from local to global successfully?
Look, I think I've always had a spirit of adventure. There's an intrepidness to how I approach life. I think of that quote, is it Helen Keller, that life is a daring adventure of nothing at all. And I think being Aussie, actually, and you Kiwis, we're a long way. You grow up a long way from the rest of the world. But even in Australia, felt like I grew up a long way from civilization. I mean, I grew up in a really rural area. So even a big city that had a McDonald's in it was exciting for me, literally for my first 18 years. So there was just a curiosity and a spirit of like, what's out there in the world? And, and so curiosity, adventure, and then obviously a willingness to get out of my own comfort zone and to leave the familiarity of where I'm from behind again and again and again and again, like just countless times.
Yeah. Was it for myself personally, I grew up in a small town, then I went to the Wanaka thing, then I did the Auckland thing, and then, your bubbles, they don't burst, you just build a new one. And it's not that like these lily pads, you go to this new challenge, this new thing, or it's a bigger bubble or whatever it is. Do you think that's just a DNA trait of curiosity to try and see and gain new perspective and growth personally? Because usually a lot of times the people that are, just happy doing their thing, 9 to 5, clock in, clock out, whatever, nothing there's wrong with that, but they are content with their headspace of challenging what their normal is. Have you just, even now, are you still pushing that envelope of what you feel like, why can't we do that, ... what would this be like,
Yeah.
Look, why not, and why?
And I moved back to the United States 2 weeks ago today, from living in Asia, in Singapore and in Australia for the last 9 years, and had been in the US for over 10 years before that. So I've sort of feel like I've just come back again after a long time on the other side of the world. And I think part of it is personality, and how much of it is our personality shaped by our environment, our birth order and all those, how we were raised, etc. But I'm someone who actually does get bored easier maybe than other people. Like I love, changing things around in my home every now and again. I enjoy going on holidays to different places, not going to the same cabin in the woods or on the lake every vacation that some people are really happy with. And that's not a judgment. It's just different. I just enjoy variety. So I've just moved back here to the DC area where I lived before. And so there's a familiarity to that. But I'm always kind of interested to do more things and learn more things. And business life as usual after a while becomes, even if life's great, I'm still like, okay, but what else is there? And I don't think it comes from a place of, I'm just never content, more than I'm just always curious to experience new experiences.
Well, I was just thinking in my headspace of, is it when you kind of, you have curiosity times courage equals adventure, like when you're curious about something, but then the courage to go try it, you're like, stuff it, let's go. And then the byproduct every single time, regardless, is going to be some type of adventure or learning or progress. It's quite an interesting headspace, because if you have courage but not curiosity, then what are you courageous for? Or creativity, that kind of goes line in line. That's Now, maybe that's some type of insight around, do you feel that there is a formula of how you try and approach helping others with their leadership and stuff? Like what's your, you've obviously got to be around the Forbes crew and, looking at the companies that you've worked for and the places that you've been over the last wee while. Is there a trait that you've found that is consistent time and time again when you've seen leaders that want to change but don't know how?
Look, fear is the underlying emotion, and that expresses itself in many, many different ways and different colours. And sometimes it is an absolute fear of being found out as not good enough, as inadequate in some way, and that imposter syndrome. When are they going to realise if I do this that my cover will be blown? But generally, I believe absolutely that threads through those who aren't able to achieve the levels of fulfillment and success that they really want, and really in their own, whatever their potential is. And we're all different, right? We're all wired for different things. Not everyone's wired to be, a CEO, or not everyone wants to be a trailblazing entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur. I mean, we're different. Different things light us up, and we have different strengths. But I think fear underpins what gets in the way of people. And it's why so much of my work in the leadership space, in the corporate realm, but frankly across the board, is really around helping people to be braver, helping people to master and manage those fears.
So on that, right, when you say fear, is that, if you're talking at the C-suite, is it net at more of a internal fear for those that they don't feel like brave enough or confident enough of their abilities, or is it fear of what others externally are thinking? Is it internal or external? Where's the tension pull on that fear if that was to get broken down?
Oh, look, obviously it's both. And often when we talk about our fear of what other people might say, or other people not liking things, if you bring all that back, well, it's like, well, if they don't like what I do, if we're not grounded enough in our own sense of self, then we're going to give a lot of power away to keeping other people happy and approval and accolades and admiration. And that's where, the work around, say, growth mindset, it's like certain people that get really good at doing something, and they're like, I don't want to risk not looking good at something. I don't want to risk not nailing it and getting the 5-star review or the accolades or the front cover of Forbes. And so it's that willingness to not nail it that actually makes the difference. And I think whether it's in the corporate realm or obviously in the entrepreneurial space, there's obviously different stakeholders and there's different types of risks you have to take. But people who have a really strong sense of their own strengths and who they are, their own identity, and it's not determined by everybody else, are those who are willing to put themselves out there and not get comfortable with being comfortable. It's really easy when you've had a certain level of success to kind of go, hey, I'm just going to stay here now. But people are continually like challenging themselves, stretching themselves. Okay, what now? What more? What haven't I done? What else could I do?
That bit around risk you're talking about in the roles is really intriguing to me, because the way I see it a lot of times in big organizations, probably not to the same sort of extent, will be someone in a position of power is at the end of the day potentially more interested in their LinkedIn profile, making sure it goes up with status or position or success, than they are about being brave to actually try something, maybe fail and actually go side or down, because the weight of that arc of where they're supposed to be going sometimes makes them make decisions which are more on the risk averse side, which are more on defense. It's kind of the offensive defensive thing, right? Is that something that you've potentially noticed as well?
Absolutely. You see that when people are in their 20s and they're hungry, there's not much to lose, right? You're starting out, you've got nothing to lose. You don't have any money anyway. You don't have a reputation anyway. And then when people get into their later 30s, their 40s, 50s, right, there's more to lose. And so to your point, the offensive versus defensive, people go from playing to win, which is to forge new ground, to learn, to learn new things, to launch new products, to playing not to lose. And it's a very different mindset. And I think this year, 2020, as this crisis upended all our lives and our certainty and our businesses and everything sort of got tilted off its axis, I saw a lot of people moving into that defensive, play not to lose. Like there was, literally an existential crisis. Will our business actually survive this? And clearly some, it's just been too tough, and some haven't and some won't. But while it's extremely natural to immediately look at, okay, we just need to shore up what we've got. We need to cut costs. We need to, really come back to core. If we stay in that mode, in that mindset of being purely defensive, you actually miss out on the opportunities, like that creative destruction that you get out of a crisis, like all the things, the multi-crisis of 2020. And so I think that's where it's really important to constantly look at, like, not only, what is it I'm afraid I might lose, but where is there an opportunity to forge new ground, to innovate new ideas, to come up with better ways of doing what we do, of serving our customers or, and our stakeholders altogether.
Exact example of that is in the commercial real estate space, with all the stuff, the millionaires that hold it are all on defense of like, holy shit, let me save. And then the billions are like, giddy up, let's play, because now I've got a whole bunch of, undervalued assets which are going to come through and steamroll. I've got a friend of mine who's the head of commercial at one of the big things in New Zealand. That's exactly what he said was happening. He goes, mate, offense and defense. Millionaires, defense. Billionaires, offense. It depends what side of the table you're on. I was like, shit, you're right. He goes, because in their heads, they're playing a different game. They're playing decades, not years. They're playing, quarter centuries, not quarters, which changes the mindset as well of, I guess, them being able to take into it. It's always interesting, regardless whether they're selling, plumbing supplies or, widgets, the same effects and pressures on these leaders are the same. And it's clear it always comes down to their internal bravery first or whatever. I'd said, one of the things I said a bit ago was, like innovation is bravery in action, where if we're all in the same spot, but we're going to innovate, that means doing something different than everyone else. But you need that internal bravery first to be like, no, stuff it. I'm going to go try this other shit, to then go and do it. And that's when innovation happens as a byproduct externally after they've got internal bravery first. And time and time you see with situations, exactly your point, instead of, okay, well, what's next? What can we do? How can we make this better? It's freeze, shit, now what? When in this the year that's been 2020 that you talked about, do you feel that the headspace of leaders, what's been the mindset that you've seen? Because obviously everyone is remote, everyone's at home, they're in their own little offices. When you've talked to leaders in their own little safe bubble away from all the other employees and all the other pressures and all the other HR and the CEOs and the flipping whatever it may be, where's their headspace actually at with the actual challenges that are going on outside of the title of temporary relevance in their business?
Look, I think
the headspace.
I think it varies by industry and obviously by person. But I think a lot of people are looking for one, how do we, certainly in the beginning, shore things up so that we don't go under? How do we just make sure we keep our heads above water? But I've seen a lot of people really coming back to core purpose, core mission critical. What are we really about? What is our reason for existence? And I've seen some great innovation come out of this year, and I'm sure it will be well and truly flowing into next year. Sometimes it's been, it's sped up the learning curve for rolling out new ideas, for, obviously moving to the digital platforms, to getting rid of systems that frankly were outdated, and we kind of had a 5-year plan and they're like, all right, let's speed that up. But I think in terms of headspace, some people are just overwhelmed and others are excited. I've met people who go, I am thriving in this crisis. Like, this is me at my best. I mean, I'm working on all cylinders, but I'm also like, we have an ability here. There's something called the rally effect. In the midst of crisis, you rally people behind a big mission critical, and some leaders really rise to that, and it's an incredibly exciting time to activate that rally effect, because to really tap everyone and get everyone pulling together. We've got bigger things at stake here than kind of our usual silo squabbles. If we don't rally, we're not going to survive this. So that can lead to some really exciting stuff too. And then others can be just stuck in overwhelm. And I think, frankly, this year is a year some people have really risen, and they've said they've learnt more than they've ever learnt in their whole lives. They've developed so much in who they are and how they lead. And others are literally just have really, really, really struggled. And hence why mental health has been a huge issue.
So a great segue. If there's 100 leaders that you've talked to, half of them are on offense, half of them are on defense. What is different in their mindset for those that are having the best year ever, that are charging through, they're rallying the troops, they're getting on board, they're making new initiatives, they're creating efficiencies, versus those that are, freaking out? What is the common thread, headspace wise, between offense and defense of leadership in 2020?
Self-trust.
What do you mean by that?
People who know that whatever happens, I can handle it, and whatever unfolds here, we'll deal with it. We'll be okay. Like, whatever happens, I'll be okay. We'll be okay. Versus people who focus purely on what scares them and don't have that trust in their own ability to deal with what's coming. And I know it's a kind of a different construct. It's, what is self-trust? But just that sort of inner faith, that inner groundedness. Whatever happens, I'll deal with it. And it's interesting. You might have you heard of the Stockdale Paradox?
No, I'm not. I failed high school, but go for it.
I didn't learn this in high school either, I can assure you. So there was a guy, Admiral Stockdale. Jim Collins originally wrote about him in his book Good to Great, but he was captured, American, and put into the Hanoi Hilton during the Vietnam War. And many people around him who were stuck in these really bleak conditions, many of the other captives, prisoners, some of them just died of despair, because every year they thought they'd be home for the holidays and they weren't. And he just knew that he wouldn't be home for the holidays until the war was over. And he said, but he just knew that he would ultimately get out of there. And afterwards, they kind of coined it as the Stockdale Paradox, because I think leaders who can face the brutal reality of the situation, like, this is tough, this is dire, we might have to cut back 20% of our staff, we're going to, take a hit here and a hit here. There's no kind of putting rose-colored glasses on, but absolute faith that will ultimately prevail. And actually, Gallup did a study of all the great crises of the 20th century. And they looked at everything from, the Second World War and Pearl Harbor and the GFC and 9/11. And the attributes that they look for, that people look for in leaders, is hope, that they will instill hope. We will get through this. One way or another, we'll get through this. That they could trust their judgment, that there was a stability to them. And there was calm. They were calm in the eye of the storm, and that they could trust them. They knew they couldn't control the situation. They knew that there was a lot of things that were uncertain, and the leader didn't know. They couldn't predict the future, just like this year. Like, we've all got it wrong. We thought we'd be back to business by year end. But a faith that, whatever happens, will come through. And I think leaders can't operate from that place of sort of deliberate optimism and calm if they actually don't know in themselves, I will get through. And so their identity transcends their immediate circumstances. And yeah.
No, you go for it.
Yeah. So when I say self-trust, it's just that deep, innate, it's all going to be okay, even when I don't know how, even when I'm not sure I have all the answers, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah, you talked about, self-trust and absolute faith. Is that similar to kind of relentless optimism? Yeah,
and it's optimism. And optimism, I'm an optimist, but that doesn't mean that you're not realistic about hard reality too. I mean, sometimes the word optimism gets a bad spin because we talk about, but you always see the positive of everything. No, you can say this is crappy. I mean, look at the death count in America today. it's shocking, it's brutal, it's tragic. So we're not saying, oh, everything's good. We're saying actually it's really hard, and there's tragedy, and there's heartache, and there's hardship, and there's people doing it really tough. And my decisions are going to impact people's holidays. However, it is that that good can always come from bad, and that we will find goodness in this, and actually we will be able to create a future that's absolutely worth living for, and that is actually even better than where we've come from, given it time, given it commitment. And I think that's a really important distinction to make when it comes to being optimistic. Relentless optimism, absolutely, but it's not about wearing the rose-coloured glasses and denying hard realities.
With leadership, when we first went into lockdown, I was been thinking about this idea of, like pre-COVID, after COVID, before, after, what it's like, and everyone went through the unprecedented times, and it's time to reset and regroup and blah, 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 everything. Then everyone came out of it in New Zealand and lots of other places, and kind of seemed like a lot of it went back to business as usual. And the second one sort of came through, and everyone, went down a bit more of a mental spiral as if it was tougher. But when I was talking to Rob Fife, he was the CEO of in New Zealand, about it, he goes, Robett, it's not pre-COVID, after COVID. It's the bit in the middle, which is the most important, which is during COVID, because it's now where it's not, we're still transitioning through, and the decisions that we're making now are actually shifting what things will be like in the future. When you look at leadership from pre-COVID to leadership after COVID and during, what do you think will there be a shift in leadership, successful leadership moving forward after this? And what will the difference have been from what it was like before COVID?
I think leaders have always had to deal with uncertainty, and great leaders have always been able to be decisive amid the ambiguity and the unknowns. But I think there's been almost a normalization, some level of normalization of uncertainty, and people have had to practice pivoting and iterating, like make decision, but iterate and iterate and iterate and change that decision. And I am hopeful that if you think about innovation, you mentioned it before, you get innovation by being willing to make mistakes and take risks. You don't get it by making sure you have every duck in a row and there's zero tolerance for failure. And so in a year like this, when there's so much uncertainty, leaders have had to get more comfortable making decisions with far less confidence in what the future is going to look like than they usually would. Usually they're like, oh, we want to have, a 80% confidence rating on our future forecast. Well, it's been hard to do that, but they've had practice in let's make a decision, the best decision we can with what we know, and let's iterate that and adjust and adjust and adjust and adjust, and sometimes throw it out and sometimes do a whole 180. And I think that actually is like a muscle. It's a psychological muscle, getting more comfortable with the discomfort of making decisions and making calls and trying things and taking risks amid all the unknowns. And so it's my hope that actually out the other side of this, you have what I call far more braver, more courageous leaders who are more comfortable with the ambiguity and therefore actually can operate in that space that sometimes many weren't able to before, of, well, let's just play with this, let's experiment, and let's give ourselves a lot of space to change as we go along. And I think that is a kind of a psychological muscle. I, prior to COVID, saw so many, particularly in really large corporates, I've seen so much insecure, cowardly sort of leadership. People are too scared to make a decision unless they know it can't possibly be wrong because they don't want to look bad. And I think people who are being rigid and needing to have everything lined up and needing a lot of predictability, they've just floundered and gone under in this environment.
Well, it's exposed bad leadership, because having to run things remotely, make these calls, they can't hide behind anything else. They've been forced to make these, do it. And I do feel that this, you're talking about that the percentage that's been on offense through this when they come out of it. A tough decision in the future is going to be nothing compared to what it was during 2020, because they're in the office with their people. They can look them in the eye. They can have a conversation. They can have a work brainstorm with a whiteboard. They can go for a lunch and look, and have a real chat. So my thought was that the future leaders that are really going to shine through, this has been the filter of, if you're a shit leader and you've not cared about your team, you don't really understand, the progressive nature of how you need to think about to make your company thrive and survive, or whatever it is, you've been exposed and they're about to get booted, right? After it, those that have taken it, yes, there will be a lot of failures and stuff as well, but I think there might be a fundamental shift in the type of leaders that have more successful businesses in the future going through this, real world MBA of a shit show that has been 2020, right? Does that make you more confident in all of business and leadership in general, because everyone's gone through this as a collective together with these challenges? Because without it, let's say if humanity, if I'm an alien looking at humans, we're like, oh, we just take along, and this happens, we're like, what the fuck, and it does that. When we build back up, do you think that humanity's resilience to running businesses in the commercial sense will the world have better business after this?
I believe yes. Call me an optimist, but I believe that absolutely what everyone has experienced, almost a collective trauma, but a collective shaking up this year, will actually lead to better leadership, will actually lead to businesses doing business better, will lead ultimately to better outcomes. But of course, not without all the pain first. We're going through that. And to your point, in terms of, you think of what it is to be resilient and to be agile and to have capacity and bandwidth for things. You can read about that in books. You can, intellectually understand the concepts, but it's like going off traveling. You're a Kiwi, I'm an Aussie, and you live around the world, you experience things. You can read a travel book and then you can actually be backpacking in some place with not much money and it's late at night and there's a storm coming in and you don't know where you're going to stay or whatever. They're very different experiences, and you've had to figure it out. Well, that builds a resiliency. It builds an agility. It builds self-reliance. It builds creative, resourceful thinking in ways that just intellectually understanding those concepts doesn't. So I think people have really practiced, had a masterclass of building key leadership competencies for the virtual world that we live in. And the reality is it's not suddenly going to become, very certain and predictable next year. I mean, this is the norm, is uncertainty. And I think people are going to be that bit more comfortable with the discomfort that uncertainty always triggers. And those who have, I think about even a year or two ago, all the stress people had, it's like, oh, what are the numbers going to be? You go, oh my goodness, bring us back 2 years ago. It felt incredibly stable.
Safe, yeah.
But research shows that our brains, when uncertainty drives people to go into the defensive, and that closes down our cognitive thinking. Like, we literally can't think as smart when all we're doing is focus on potential losses and potential risks. And the more comfortable people are at looking at, well, what are the possibilities right now in the midst of all this disruption? What are the ways we could use this and turn this into a catalyst for innovation, for doing what we do better, smarter, bolder? And actually it expands our vision. Literally, we can think more creatively, more laterally. We can move outside the box and come up with whole new paradigms that we wouldn't have if we hadn't been thrust out there. So I really believe we're going to see some really profound and ongoing changes in all different spheres coming out of this year that I think ultimately will serve humanity in the long run. But of course, right now we're still in the midst of it, and we're yet to see that.
It's intriguing when you look at leadership, the way that things have potentially been challenged through this year. I am insanely looking forward to, for as much as a shit show as 2020 been, the actual lessons from inside all these bigger businesses after this is all said and done and the waves have calmed down, and you actually then hear these great stories and lessons and mergers and acquisitions and partnerships and all, like the stories of great leadership through this, which are happening as we speak. I'm really interested and intrigued to watch come out of the woodworks in years to come, because there is so much amazing survival by so many businesses, and exactly to your point, the thriving of so many other these companies. The leadership lessons of what's been going on inside will be epic. Like, I love watching, or just recently, a bunch more, professional athletes and stuff. They've been having their podcasts, and you start hearing these stories from 20 years ago that you remember. Oh, I was there when I remember what happened. And then you hear the story behind the story. I had no idea that ... When that thing came out, I thought it was ... So, that gets me pretty excited around the future of like leadership lessons that will be learned from the next generation through this, if we come out more resilient and open and talk about it. Because obviously at the moment it's probably tough for everyone to talk about all of it because they're in it. I was going to ask you about out of this, right? What do you think the top 1, 2, or 3 priorities for great leaders will be post this? Do you think they've changed, shifted, and navigated it all? Like, when they stack up, where's my energy going to go and what's it going to do? How do you think they prioritize maybe 1, 2, and 3 for great leadership from a CEO position out after COVID?
I think, one, just getting real clarity of where to from here. So what's the invented future we want to create now? We've all been sort of in a semi-survival mode. People have been drinking life communications through a fire hose. So what's the invented future? So that's where I would start with. What's the vision that you're moving towards? I think it's so important I use that term, invented future versus the default future. So getting real clarity around that. 2, human capital. We've obviously seen, workforces, there's been a lot of disruption. There's been a lot of cutbacks. It's been hard for those who go, and it's been hard for those left behind too. So I think one is just really prioritizing people and making sure they've got everybody on the right people on board and supported to be able to achieve that vision. And 3, just that cultural shift in terms of taking the best and the gifts of this last year. How do we keep the best of, in terms of being agile and iterating and making sure that we're not going to, that wasn't just a 2020 thing where we had to be making it up as we go along. How can we take some of that and embed that in our culture and in our systems, in our processes moving forward, so that we can be a more innovative, agile organisation, forward-leaning organisation. But something we haven't touched on there is the people aspect, because I do think this hasn't just been an economic crisis and a public health crisis. It's been a people crisis. How do you create the conditions for people to do their best and boldest work under massive pressure and in the midst of massive uncertainty? And that will be ongoing, but really good leaders are able to create that. I call it, in my work and in my books and what have you, a culture of courage. How do you foster that culture of courage that emboldens people to do both, to be bold in their thinking and take risks and push back and, building that psychological safety?
On leadership, you're talking about people. I was going to actually great segue once again, Margie, just hitting the spots here. It's been great. How do you think it's possible to build virtual culture? Because with the exodus of tech talent in San Francisco, with the exodus of so many great brands and businesses going remote and everywhere, there's not those chances for the water cooler conversations. And there's now many, a friend of mine that I know is a CEO of this company. He just took over, and in the first 6 weeks, he's seen one person, because obviously through this. What challenges are leaders having to do to try and create culture virtually when potentially they may never meet some of their employees or whatever? I mean, I haven't seen much in the sphere so far around leading virtually to build that up yet. And I'm wondering, is virtual culture going to be a thing, and how they do it? And what have you seen when it comes to all things that have been virtual around people? Because I think it's a big one.
I think it's a really big one too. And I think it's something we need to give a lot of thought to, in terms of talking about, the new norm is everyone just kind of works from home. And I know some organisations have said, look, you can do that for the rest of your life if you want to. It's okay. But I believe that nothing can replace the in-person connections that happen and the sparks of creativity that occur when people come together and have that. And I mean, I've been doing a lot of virtual work, facilitating, keynote speaking, etc. And I don't believe it's possible to replicate what it is when you bring a group of people together in a room. So I think that building culture across virtual teams has been and will continue to be a challenge. I think you can absolutely find a hybrid model moving forward where maybe we say, look, yes, you have a lot more flexibility and work from home, but we do need to get together and we need people in the office at least 2 days a week, or we need to make sure we bring everyone together in these structured ways, because I think that's actually really important. And I know there's people who just operate off virtual teams. I have a virtual team. We don't get together that often, and we certainly are not at the moment. But we have got together. And in the meantime, what do you do? And I think leaders have to be so intentional about creating very personal touch points with people. And so if it's a Zoom conversation, having time, we're not focused at all on work right now. Having games, being playful, creating, structuring, engineering, having fun times. We're all going to, show up in our favorite costume or share a funny story or a photo or something that helps to build that sense of personal connection beyond pure transactional work stuff. I think one-on-ones, those in leadership roles, having as many one-on-ones and not just, having the Zoom where you're looking them in the eye, even if you can't be with people in person. I think we've got to be careful. I actually wrote a Forbes column on this a little while ago. I always believe it's important to not just rely on text and email for everything, but right now I think it's even more important. Email has its place as any written communication, but having the verbal conversations with people and building that rapport is so important between people. And I think we have to double down and even put more focus on that than we usually would, because it's not naturally occurring.
Yeah, a buddy of mine in New Zealand, he's CEO of one of the telcos, and he's been doing little personal videos through their internal team chats and stuff, just a morning little catch up, saying what's up, just popping in, he's on his t-shirt, doing whatever, and just trying to really humanize. I feel that a lot of time people in an organization, unless they know them, they see them in the ivory tower up there and the suit and the boardroom and the power and whatever. They don't know what it's like if they're just at home hanging and the cat walks past, or them in a t-shirt. And it kind of feels in many ways, well, New Zealand anyway, it's become pretty clear that it really has flattened off and humanized a lot of leaders who others in the organization potentially didn't think were human. And I think that's kind of a good thing, right? But it's that transition of how does that convert from online to offline, and that transition piece is what I'm intrigued to see what will happen next.
Yeah, me too. I've heard a lot of people say very much the same thing, that it's been really cool to see, I didn't even know you had twins, or I didn't realize that you were a dog lover, or whatever, those just, and funny stuff, like being able to laugh. We need to laugh, right? We need to play, and I think the humanization of some leaders are already pretty human, but others it was like, I didn't even know they were human. They really are. Someone's married to them. Who knew? So they've got kids who love them. Wow, go figure. So I think that's been a really cool aspect, and you don't want to lose that, right? We don't want to lose that. So how can we take the best of this time? But I do think that cultural piece, while we will, I'm sure, never go back to the norm that everyone comes into the office all day, every day, I've spoken to so many CEOs who go, we will never have that again. We will always give more flexibility. We've seen that this can work. We've had, I've just actually this morning met with someone in person actually, and she runs her own PR company, and she said, we haven't had anyone coming together, but we've had a really great year. I mean, her clients are in the health space and wellness space. So it's been a really good year. She said, and actually people have performed really well. But she said, we are missing some of the creativity and collaboration that comes when we come together. So we'll always have more flexibility moving forward, but we absolutely still need to get people together because we're missing out on some of the ideas that would be coming if we were coming together more. So I think it's like, how do we do that? And I've a few CEOs I've talked to said, we might have it where there's a couple of days a week we want everyone on deck. We might have fewer meetings, having been based in Asia Pacific. Instead of flying, from Singapore to Hong Kong every 6 weeks for a half-day meeting, we're going to have them quarterly, but we're going to make them 2 full days, or we're going to have them, every 6 months and just make it a bigger event. So it's going to be interesting to see how it does emerge, how we emerge the other side of it in terms of what the new norms are.
Well, I think it's almost 2 waves, right? The first one is, hey, we're on lockdown. They come back in. This is how it's going to be, kind of similar. And then the second one happens, or if they're still on it for a prolonged period of time, and then it's, wait a second, actually, this is the new normal. We need to tweak and change. It does feel like mentally all leadership has shifted to, now this is the way it will be. So flipping get up on board or piss off, because it's been 9 months and you can't just expect nothing to happen. So they've got to, try and create and go. I was going to switch gears just a little bit and ask, keynote speaking, events, conferences, places. There's thousands of speakers all around the world. I know a whole bunch of them that do, they roll out and this is what they do. How have you seen the actual business element of professional speakers and events and conferences? And I mean, it's a big business, right? There's a whole bunch of, it's a machine. How do you think speakers have had to pivot through these times? And those you've talked to in those circles, I mean, at the end of the day, they've got to break bread and make cash too. How have you seen the change of commercialization of talent and speakers actually go during all this, and where do you see that heading?
Yeah, it's been really interesting because obviously I do a lot of keynote speaking myself, and back in, mid-late March, I just, bam, a whole lot of the year's pipeline sort of just fell off. And then over time it's picked back up, and I'm doing now a lot more virtual work. That said, there's still been, it has not been my best year, put it that way, in terms of income. Now, speakers, there's obviously different types of speakers. Some people are really deep matter subject experts, and I believe even my own work, how do we get people to be braver? How do we get people to embrace change, etc.? So there's been a huge need for that, and I've done quite a lot of virtual work in terms of workshops, and I've certainly done keynotes as well. But I believe there's no way known you can replicate what it is to bring a whole lot of people together and to do that. Some people I've seen invest really heavily in, a lot of bells and whistles in terms of multi-camera, studio, TV studio sort of setups. I think that'll become more normalized moving forward. That said, I think there's still going to be, once we come out the other side of this, when people are feeling safe to come together, I think there's going to be, I've talked to so many people who go, I cannot wait to get back. I meet a lot of people. There's about a third go, I'm happy to just never, ever go to the office again. A third say, I'm fine to go back when it's safe. And a third are like, get me back. I cannot wait. I'm champing at the bit. I miss conferences. I miss travel. I miss going to the office. So there's a lot of people like that who don't thrive working from home. They like a bit of versatility, but they certainly don't want to be there all the time. They love being with people and the connection that comes. And so from a speaking perspective, and I do obviously a kind of facilitating, leadership teams and stuff as well, I think there's going to be a lot of people that are looking forward to bringing everybody together again. And they may do it differently they did in the past, I think more intentionally. There's times we don't need to come together. We can do Zoom, but when we do come together, let's make sure it's really well thought out and really impactful. And there's a lot of trust building, rapport building those relationships, because maybe we're not going to have the number of touch points at the water cooler moving forward. And for me personally as a speaker, I love being with people. It's why I do what I do, and I really miss it. And I can speak into the camera on my computer like I'm doing right now, and that's great. And, I see a bunch of faces, and sometimes if it's a small group, it's interactive and it can be really valuable and people get stuff from it. But at the end of the day, your press, end meeting, it's more difficult to keep people fully engaged, where I usually do an hour. Let's stick with 35, 40 minutes and then do Q&A. It's just, it's more difficult for sure. And I think it's a lot easier for people to zone out when they're just sitting behind a computer.
Well, it's the energy piece, right? I talk about like energy architecture, how you craft and curate experience with people. And like, I love that type of thing. I can walk into a room and I can feel I'm IQ, not as smart as I am EQ wise. So I can roll up and I can feel that. And I roll into a room and you can, build momentum with energy amongst each other. And even if someone's not into it to start with, by the end they are, opposed to, you're exactly right. They hit the end and it's just end meeting. Now what, and I think there's such a tension and force of, and I don't think it will ever be broken, because fundamentally at the end of it and the DNA of it is that craving for genuine human connection in the real world is not going to go anywhere. And if anything, it's been more like my sort of mini prediction was, the second this thing's open, people are going to travel, connect, go out, people are going to go to town. They're just going to go for it because they're like, finally I can go to the bar, or I'm going to Hawaii, or a ... So I think 21, the second it opens, is going to be like the 16-year-old that's just got the driver's license. They're just going to get active. They're going for it. They're getting out there.
I agree. There'll be a lot of travel, etc. once everything does open up again. Absolutely. And I just think as humans, we're wired for connection. And not everybody's a raging extrovert, but we are wired for connection, and we thrive most through our connections with others. And yes, it's lovely to talk to someone across from Zoom, but ideally, if you and I were sitting there here at a bar right now or in a coffee shop, it would be actually better. It would be cool. We'd probably go into stuff that we mightn't go into chatting here behind our cameras and across the country from each other. And I think people have a deep need for emotional intimacy. And it's harder to build emotional intimacy. And the word intimate, often we kind of think of it in sexual terms, but I'm just talking that emotional, really sharing what's on my heart with what's on your heart,
Real shit. Yeah, real shit.
Maybe I'll end up in tears and maybe I won't. And I'm not saying this applies to everyone in the workplace, but it's easier. We become more detached when we're sitting behind a screen. It's why people tweet things that they would never say in person, because there's the physical distance creates this sort of emotional distance, and it's easier to be a bit detached from the real humanity of those of others. And if we constantly just living behind our screens, I think we're missing out on building some of that emotional intimacy that really is where we can enjoy the greatest fulfillment in our professional and personal lives.
And that's probably a good thing, regardless whether it's an iPhone 12 or iPhone 25 or iPhone 120 or Android, whatever it will be. That can't beat that. That technology can't beat that feeling. That technology, regardless what comes in the future, will not beat that pure personal in-person thing, and that energy of plugged into our deck won't go anywhere. I was going to, before we finish off, into parenthood, actually. So grown up with 7, 4 children, I believe. But you talk about leadership and bravery and courage with CEOs. Now, do those same lessons apply from what you've learned from what you talking to the CEOs to than talking to your children? Because I've got 2 daughters under 3 now, and then just genuine selfish question for myself. How do you approach empowering courage and bravery in 2 young daughters that are under 3, opposed to some 60-year-old dude named John in a 3-piece suit from Milwaukee?
I remember when my 16-year-old, we were living in Australia, and my husband was at the time working for a company that said they would move us back to the United States, and he's ultimately left that company. But my oldest said, look, I really want to finish high school in the US because I really want to go and do college basketball. And at 16, sort of managed it all himself and headed off to live on the other side of the world to go to boarding school. And I remember being sad about him going. He's a great kid, and he's actually just finishing college this week now. And And I remember saying to someone, I can't believe he's, going, and they're like, well, Margie, you talk about a culture of courage. You have brave kids because you give them space to learn how to be self-reliant, to be independent, to navigate risk. Even getting on a plane. All my kids were traveling on planes from a much younger age than average, including internationally. And so I think actually there's a huge parallels with leadership in any team or organization and leading in a family. And how do you create the conditions for your children to thrive and to express themselves fully, and not to operate from fear, but operate from self-trust that whatever happens, they can handle it, and to make smart decisions that aren't guided by fear and insecurity, but by passion and inspiration. And so really instilling in children a growth mindset. It's okay that you're not going to land the perfect score or get on the A team. It's okay. Why don't you just give it a go and try? And if you didn't land it, oh, well, that was an interesting experience. What did you learn from trying out for the top team? Or what did you learn from missing out on the lead role? And hey, but well done for trying. I give my kids, have always just massively rewarded their courage and their attempt to try, and have had to be brave myself in letting them take risks, letting them go out and not overprotecting them. And as parents, two little girls, you're very protective of their well-being and safety. But I have seen the consequences of parents who overly protect and shelter their children, who make sure they're only going to get the A's and they only win, and they're never anywhere that's remotely risky. Then they hit 18, go to college, and they don't know how to tell that that's a really bad alleyway to go down and that one's fine. So you've kind of got to help them learn to navigate the world, which has lots of risks and lots of decisions. How do you set them up so that when they go out in the world, they can figure things out and be smart and sensible about it?
Great way to finish. Great way. Okay, so let them. Well, it's tough for me too, because I was an ex-professional snowboarder, so I almost died every day. And now, literally, someone said, "Oh, you're going to try and get them snowboarding?" I'm like, "Hell no!" They're going to stay at home. They can do some drawing. They can sit down and play with some crayons. Stuff that. And it's like, wait a second, you can't do that. I'm like, yes, I can. And then instantly, I was like, wait a second. I can't be that guy. You can't be that guy, because you've got to, they're two daughters under 3 now. So it is, those days will be coming, but it's great to know that. I think at the end of the day, if you exactly what we talked about, give them that sort of environment where they can feel brave to try and do, and the courage to go and give it a crack. That's the hook, right? Which is awesome.
My kids did about 58 different sports. I mean, literally, they laugh. They're like, "Mum, we don't know any family that kids have done as many sports as our family." And let me just say, most of them were very mediocre at 98% of those sports. I didn't have, actually, my oldest loved basketball, but still, he didn't manage to land in the, Division 1 through 3 team in college basketball. So, but he gave it his best shot, and he learned a lot. And so I think it's just letting them have the space to discover, because maybe not you're an athlete, maybe they won't be into athletics at all. And I had to learn, you know what? They've got to find their own thing. Just because they don't want to play sport, that's totally fine. Not everyone wants to play sport. They want to be on stage.
I get it. Look, I really appreciate your time. This has been great chat. I've learned a lot. I've got some good stuff that you've got. We've got self-trust in there. See, selfishly, as everyone else gets value, I get to learn some stuff as well, which is just super cool. But Margie Warrell, really appreciate your time. And as soon as this is all over, I will track you down at one of your keynotes, and I'll come to an event with 1,000 people, and we'll have that wine and maybe a cry.
Or maybe we'll just have a good laugh instead.
Sounds good. Hey, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much, Margie. If people want to check out your work, margiewarrell.com, is that the spot? Anywhere else they can go to? That's LinkedIn?
Yes, and my books, including my latest one, which is about self-trust, You've Got This, is on there and on Amazon, etc. And my leadership programs are at globalcourage.com.
globalcourage.com, maggiewarrell.com, and also go buy the book. You've Got This. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much for your time, Maggie, and enjoy the rest of the day.
You too. Take care.
Adios. See ya. Bye. All right, Margie Warrell. Epic day. Great chat. Good banter. This has been Robett Live, signing out. Radio, TalkX. Have a good day, team.